So you were kind of 6 months further down the line. The GP had said, well, you should be out after 6 months, and you weren't. So
Yeah.
what happened then?
So at that point, my grandmother and various people in my family started to look at, well, what else could we do to help the situation? Because I had been to see various kind of specialists, I guess, of what you'd call the traditional approach to medicine. And that hadn't really found anything apart from a murmur in my heart which, you know, had no bearing on the fatigue that I was experiencing. So we came across a doctor who was doing a more complementary approach. One of the things that he was kind of exploring was an anti-candida diet. So this meant cutting out all fruit,
So what's
sugar.
candida, so for people who don't know?
Yeah, so candida being a kind of an overgrowth of certain kind of yeast in the gut.
Okay.
And, you know, we have good bacteria and bad bacteria, you know, so we take probiotics, some people, and that kind of thing. And it was an overgrowth of the bad bacteria in the gut. And
so that would mean you couldn't absorb the food properly.
right.
Okay.
Yeah, and, you know, and
That makes sense,
and I'd also had IBS as a child kind of prior to this.
IBS
being irritable bowel syndrome.
And what does that do
So,
to the body?
you know, for me at that stage, prior to ME, you know, every kind of few days or few
with
weeks.
irritable bowel syndrome, what are the symptoms of that?
Yeah, so the experience I'd had prior to ME for me was bloating, wind.
Okay.
I'd get very extreme stomach pains, then relieved by a bowel movement.
Okay.
And, you know, other people experience it in different ways, but, you know, irritable bowel syndrome is kind of a diagnosis like ME. It doesn't really tell you what's happening. And as you were saying, not absorbing nutrients from food would explain the fatigue. You know, and another one of the symptoms of candida can be brain fog, feelings of dizziness, disconnection from yourself, those kind of things. So the symptoms were in many ways very similar to what it was that I was experiencing. And of course, one of the things that obviously I got was a sense of hope, that finally I was seeing somebody that, although ultimately didn't help me, believed it was possible to treat the illness.
Yes,
and that was quite groundbreaking at the time.
And what did he actually suggest for the candida?
So, you know, I obviously there were various supplements, things to boost the good bacteria in the gut, and things to kill the bad bacteria. What's also interesting in hindsight is it also involved massive changes in my diet. You know, I was a teenager who, although I would have a healthy meal most evenings, you know, I would be given sandwiches for lunch and throw them in the bin and buy chocolate bars and crisps, and, you know, I'd drink Coca-Cola literally by the pint. You know, so I had a
lot of sugar in your diet.
Huge amounts.
Yeah.
And I only ate, up until this point, 2 vegetables, which are peas and potatoes.
Yes.
So this change in diet was effectively the opposite of what I like to eat. And it's kind of an example of how desperate I was for things to change, that literally overnight, all the stuff that I'd been eating, I stopped eating. And where as a child, I'd been so resistant to trying vegetables and salad.
So you were a bit stubborn as a child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That just changed. You know, it literally overnight, I started eating all these things that I'd been afraid of eating for many years.
Did you feel better on them?
No. But, you know...
So even though you were doing the correct diet, or what appeared to be the correct diet, it still didn't alleviate the symptoms?
It didn't. And, you know, in some ways it increased the anxiety. Because then I started to become very fearful around foods. I started to believe in my mind that if I ate sugar or things that had preservatives or flavourings, it was going to make me worse.
Yeah.
But as I said, what it showed me was this was something that possibly could be treated. That it wasn't just I'd just wait around. Of course, at this point, I didn't become proactive myself in that. But, you know, the idea that there were treatments that were out there.
Yeah.
You know, I also I saw a Bowen practitioner, which is a way of kind of working with the body's energy system. And again, this kind of made sense at the time. The idea that if I've got blocked energy, I'd have no energy. So that was another thing that
so did that have any positive effect?
No, not particularly. But you know, it's what it was the beginnings of an openness to a form of medicine or treatment beyond what I'd been used to.
So you're basically experimenting with different things, trying to find something that might be the key to the opening away from the illness.
That's right. And I was so desperate that really anything that possibly made a difference, like, I was open to trying.
So what came next after the Bowen technique?
So the next thing after that was, in fact, somebody you put me in touch with. It was an iridologist.
The famous Ravi.
The famous Ravi, that's right.
Yeah.
And that at the time was quite extraordinary, because by looking in the eye, which obviously is what iridology is, he was the first person that was able to tell me my symptoms without me telling him.
So he kind of takes a microscope,
right,
looks in your eye, doesn't have to know anything about you, and he will tell you what your symptoms are and what's wrong with your body.
Yeah, and even things like he said to me, do you wake up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning and struggle to get back to sleep and kind of feel very, very on edge? Which was about blood sugar, but I had no concept of that at the time. And it was amazing to me that somebody could, just by looking in my eye, could actually understand. And it was very validifying of what was happening. Because one of the most frustrating things was I would go to school and people would say to me, well, you look fine. What's all this ME, chronic fatigue thing about? The other kids would joke, you're just at home watching telly all day.
Right.
So, to have someone to actually, without even me telling them, to look in my eye and validify the symptoms that I had, was, and also it was an extraordinary experience of a model of medicine so different to what I'd been brought up with that could give me this information.
So Ravi made suggestions. Did he suggest diet again?
Yeah, I mean, by that point, I kind of argued my diet was almost as perfect as a diet could get.
Yes.
But yeah, he gave me various treatments in form of vitamins and minerals and things to correct certain imbalances that were going on. He gave me acupuncture at one point. And again, it didn't particularly impact my symptoms and what was happening. But again, it was taking me on a path that was kind of moving me toward what eventually did become, quite an extraordinary healing journey. So, these things along the way were kind of opening me up and making me more curious about these kind of things.
Okay. So what happened after Ravi then?
After Ravi is, a famous conversation for me, that you and I had. By this point, we're 2 years into this illness. And
you're 17 years old.
I'm getting towards my 18th birthday.
So that must mean you're getting ready to take, is it A-levels? You'd have been...
Yeah, I'd already deferred a year at school. So I was, rather than do my A-levels in 2 years, I did them in 3 years. Which again was very frustrating that, I was falling behind my peers and I didn't really know anybody at school anymore. That was all quite difficult. But yes, I got to the point near to my 18th birthday where I'd had enough. I'd spent 2 years of feeling like things had been taken more and more away from me. I was skinnier and skinnier and skinnier to the point that, I looked ill by this point because I was so pale and so thin. I remember phoning you up one day and just saying to you, I hate my life. I hate everything in it. And I can't continue like this, but I don't know what to do. I felt totally powerless within my situation. I was doing these treatments, I was doing the diet that I was doing, and I'd read a few books around health and that kind of thing. So in my model of the world at that time, I didn't know what else I could be doing.
So you felt you were doing the right things.
Right.
And they weren't really making much of a difference.
Right,
That's
exactly.
depressing.
It is.